I think those are all the housekeeping rules I have. We're also going to put the housekeeping rules in the chat as well. So if you forget them, then they're over there. So firstly, happy International Women's Day. And this is Choose to Challenge theme this year. And I have some really fantastic colleagues on our chat to talk to us. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and we'll take a few minutes. The way we thought we'd do this is do a bit of an introduction. We have a few pre-prepared questions for them. So we'd ask them that, interspersed with some of the questions that some of you have been kind enough to already send us. So thank you for that. And then please feel free to put comments or questions in the chat and I'll pull them out as random as we go along. And finally, we leave about 15 minutes at the end of the hour so that you can just ask the questions to the team yourselves if you prefer, or put them in the chat and we'll pull from there. So I hope that format works with everybody else. And let's start. And Jillian, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you for that. So hello everybody, happy International Women's Day. So I'm Gillian and I'm a data science manager at Monzo. So my team looks after kind of analysis and insights for Monzo Plus and Premium, which are our new paid subscriptions that we launched last year, and all of our personal banking. So we kind of look at that in terms of like how customers are interacting with Monzo. So Sophie, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure, scrabbling for that unmute button there. I'm Sophie. I am a senior web engineer at Monzo. I work in business banking, where I'm also a tech lead. I've been here for about 2 years. Not sure what else to say really. I'll hand over to Rocco.
Hey everyone, I'm Rocco. I'm a design director at Monzo and I lead our design team. We're about a team of about 15 people and we look after the customer experience, mostly in our apps, but also on the web and our brand and cards and everything else you might see out there in the world. I've been at Monzo for about 4 years now.
Great, thank you. Actually, Voka, since you're the last person to speak, I'm going to ask you the first question, if that's okay. So one of the things we were discussing when we were prepping for this chat was Voka is part of the senior leadership team in Monzo and looks at how the organization develops and what they think and how they develop their teams. And so one of the things I guess we wanted to ask was, you're also a designer, which I guess is your first love. So how do you bring design thinking into your leadership role as part of the Monzo sort of ecosystem?
Sure. Yeah, I'm in our product senior leadership team, and I think it's been really interesting to think about that team as a group of people who each bring their own kind of perspective and expertise and individual kind of lens into what we do and how we build a like inclusive experience for our customers. And thinking about that, I feel like design is like at its simplest, it's like doing anything with intent. But it's also like a very collaborative process from a very like an empathetic point of view, and there's a lot of co-creation happening. So I don't know, I feel like that's my responsibility to bring that my background as a designer into that group, because yeah, you can use design as a process to solve obviously things for an interface, but also org design or apply it to business problems. And that's, I feel like something I don't want to forget is what my role there is, to kind of not become a generic leader, but to be a designer and bring those tools and empathy into teams that I'm on.
I think that's a fair point. And I think also one of the words you use, which was so lovely, is co-creating, and that collaborative manner in which you think about things. So Sophia, I was going to ask you, I mean, as a tech lead and being an engineer yourself, I would imagine that oftentimes you're the only woman on a tech role or an engineering role. So when you think about the idea of co-creating and you think about the idea of, well, okay, I'm the only woman, how do I co-create with all the blokes on the team and what do I do? How do you feel? It's a challenge, obviously. How do you feel that we should be thinking about changing that narrative so that you get gender balance and you look at tech, but you look at it in a really holistic way so that you co-create with your peers who are similar or, you know, interesting like you?
Yeah, I mean, being the only woman in the room, or one of the only women in the room, has been a theme since I studied at university, like did my master's basically. Like I was the only woman on my computer science master's. I have basically been one of the only women on my graduate scheme, and then one of the only women in a technical role, like all the way through. One thing I would say is, like, especially at Monzo, like, even if I'm the only woman on this team, everyone is like, in my experience has been that people are quite considerate and understanding, and they are receptive as well. So it's been my experience that, you know, if I kind of call someone out on something or like challenge something, like I'm 9 times out of 10, like I feel like I'm heard, although I'm also quite like outspoken, so I think that helps. Not that that should be the way that it is. I think it's important to make sure that, especially in things like we have product review meetings with senior leadership, and like when they started, people started to point out saying, you know, there's hardly any women in these meetings. So like the balance was changed, like we changed the makeup of those meetings. So I think it's really important to call out when there isn't enough balance, and if you don't have the confidence to do all the kind of role where you can do that, find someone more senior who can kind of be a sponsor for that and make sure that that change happens from above if it needs to.
I think that's very funny, but it's not often that you get that ability to just call on someone senior, call on a sponsor to go, oh, listen, let's all work together to solve this problem. And I think one of the things is, Sophie, I mean, you've been at Monzo for a while, but Gillian, you've only recently joined Monzo. So you're still understanding the culture and understanding the way it works. And so one of the questions, I guess, is in this incredibly challenging year, which has been, you know, this horrible thing called COVID, how did you manage that transition of going from your old company in a pandemic, deciding, oh, I'm going to interview at a new place, join Monzo, and you're in the data science team. So how did you get to that point where you're going, I'm going to look for a new challenge and join this company? And try and onboard remotely and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I kind of had already started thinking about moving before the pandemic even happened. So I'd been in my previous role at Booking.com for around 3.5 years, and was just looking for a new challenge, and also looking to move to London for kind of personal reasons. So it was something that was already in motion, and I guess I just kept on with it when the pandemic started. But it definitely made things a lot more challenging, and I was personally quite apprehensive about like onboarding remotely and not being able to meet any of the people that I was working with. And I think for me, one of the really important things was just trying to meet as many people as I could one-on-one, kind of like virtually, obviously, but just to get to know them, because I think a lot of people have written that kind of when you're in a big remote meeting, it can be really hard to like speak up and contribute when there's kind of like 10 people all on a hangout. It's hard to interrupt and say something. And I found that particularly difficult when I kind of didn't know any of those people. So if I was in a big room with people I'd never met before, but as soon as I started to kind of meet them and get to know people personally and kind of more what they did, that felt already a lot more comfortable. So I think that was one thing that made a big difference for me. And people at Monzo kind of were really receptive and happy to have one-on-ones, which I believe is always the case, but that really helped me. And I think also making social time with people throughout the week has helped a lot, because those small things of kind of like noticing when someone's had a bad day when they're into the office, or picking up on those kind of environmental things just isn't possible remotely. So if there's a little more of like a social time in my team, we have a cup of coffee every week, or
lovely, yeah,
check in how people are at the beginning of a meeting, that really helps just kind of bond and get to know people better, and also support them through kind of what challenging times that we're going through at the moment.
Yeah, fair. I mean, I think one of the questions in the chat that's come up just now is about how do you amplify voices, and how do you get to be confident in a meeting, and how do you therefore bring people along with you? So could I ask the three of you actually, what are your tips and tricks when you're in a meeting and you are trying to do that and bring everybody with you and amplify the voices in the room of perhaps people who are less confident than you? How do you do that, and how do you bring the quieter voices into conversation? Vuko, would you start, and then we'll go with Sophie and Gillian.
Sure thing. And I think this is a topic we discussed a lot, because we do have quite large meetings these days, and the product teams, like, there can easily be 15 people in a room. One thing we try to do is kind of share airtime and make sure that this is something we've been trying to do with the leadership team, is not to put people on the spot, but to ask people, kind of say, Sophie, what do you think? Sorry, Sophie, to call you out here, but to kind of make sure if it does look like someone has something to say but isn't speaking up, to kind of draw those out as well and make sure people feel like they are welcome to contribute. The other thing we're doing is very different. It's actually to not have to take also these conversations out of a room and like out of these big meetings and into documentation and asynchronous communication. That can be a very different way of making an impact. So we do a lot of pre-reads and documents, and like you can comment on proposals, and we use Slack. These are all ways that people who might not feel comfortable talking at all can have a huge impact and use like that kind of written, more structured way of communication to make their case. And I feel like that's a really big part of how we did things at Monzo.
That's really great. I mean, also to your point, sometimes people are just introverted and they might have a lot to say, but they also don't feel comfortable. I mean, Sophie, what has been your experience of tips and tricks for amplifying?
Yeah, I think one thing I've seen work really well. There's a colleague who does this a lot. I've seen him do this actually. He will often draw attention to comments that, I don't know if he does it on purpose, but like he'll often be like, yeah, I totally agree with so-and-so's point, and then expand on it. And like something that a lot of women encounter in the workplace and meetings is that they either get talked over, or their points go unnoticed, and then someone makes the same point 5 minutes later, right? Or like their ideas go uncredited. And so making a conscious effort to make sure that people do get credit for their ideas, and that if you get talked over, either I tend to, if I see someone's trying to get a word in and struggling, I try and bring them into the conversation at the next available opportunity. Sometimes you've just got to butt in and say, so and so, were you gonna say something, you know? And yeah, just making sure that quieter people who make points have their points reinforced, being like, yeah, I agree with what so and so said. And in the worst case scenario, if someone just repeats something that someone else says, just say, oh yeah, I think so and so already made that point, whatever. It does require a bit of bravery, perhaps, especially those last ones, but like if you are the kind of person who feels comfortable doing that, then absolutely do that for the people
that makes sense. Gillian, what do you think?
Yeah, so I always appreciate kind of if somebody asks my opinion, and I try to do that to others kind of when it might be more difficult for them to interrupt someone or kind of speak out. And I think there's also a lot you can do in terms of how you structure meetings. So I know our process for kind of giving feedback in the team is that we'll just go around through everybody. So kind of cycle through it and make it that the people kind of participate by default and can say if they have nothing to add, but at least have the opportunity. And I think also for kind of giving people like an advance of what's kind of coming up, what's the agenda of the meeting, which is probably good practice anyway, but just helps kind of some people be more prepared and feel more comfortable speaking up when that actually happens.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I remember when I do in my career, because whether you sit at certain levels, you yield the room, and so you yield the question. So it comes to you and you have a question. Obviously, when you're senior, you get the opportunity to say a lot more things than if you weren't. And normally, I've been in a room where I've been the only one of two women in the room, and the other ladies not saying a thing. So when it comes to you, you kind of go, okay, actually I yield to that person. And so then they get to ask the question and you point it to them so that they get to kind of amplify their question and say what they have to say. Because also sometimes it's the quietest people in the room have the most wonderful, interesting things to say. So it's good to give them an opportunity. One of the other questions that has come around, and I think also because we're living in these challenging times and working in COVID, firstly, I can't believe we're in year 2 of this mess, but look, let's hope it all goes well and better. But for all of us, and I think quite a few people on this call as well, we're either working remotely or we are working in a hybrid working model. And Gillian, I'll stay with you if you don't mind, which is, the question to ask you is, you did onboard remotely, and I think someone's also asked a question in the chat. How did you find that, firstly, because it must have been very challenging, but also what are some of the tips and tricks that you would recommend to people who are working in that hybrid model or are thinking, okay, maybe I want to change a job, and they're being nervous about it because they are going to have to make new friends and work new colleagues. And so how did you overcome that, if you did overcome it? And what are some of the suggestions you might give us?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, a lot of things have kind of stopped, but given that we're in year 2 of this, a lot of things also have to continue. So it's kind of about making the most of the situation that we have at the moment. And I think one of the things about our current way of working is kind of like everybody's in the same situation. So we're all remotely on a call and all doing this. And I remember kind of when I used to work from home the odd day before the pandemic, it was always challenging of kind of like most people were in the meeting room together and I was the one dialing in. So I think that's something that probably we'll have to be really mindful of as things go back to normal. But at the moment, it's kind of like just an adjustment of everybody being in the same situation and kind of having to be really mindful. And I think also just the importance in kind of work at the moment of just realizing everybody's in their own home. They're not kind of able to focus completely. They might be interrupted in a meeting, something might happen, and people are kind of doing their best and having a lot of kind of compassion for that and trying to be supportive in whatever way is possible.
No, for sure, absolutely. Sophie, I mean, your team as well, you're part of engineering, and I would imagine your team loves asynchronous chatting and engaging. But from your point of view, and Monzo, I think has done a flexible hybrid sort of work situation. How have you been finding it, and how do you think year one of the pandemic going down, but how do you think we've learned? Do you think we've learned any of the lessons in year one that we're taking into year two to do it better or differently?
I think, especially compared to some of the experiences of my friends at other companies, like we've had it pretty good. We have like this absolutely like first class tech ops team. So like they do all the kind of hardware, like laptops, onboarding, all of the kind of networky stuff for the company. And before the pandemic, we had quite a few people who were already remote. So they kind of they'd work either entirely full-time remote, or they'd be kind of in once every couple of weeks or something. So we already had the infrastructure in place for home working, and we already had the flexibility to work from home whenever we wanted. So it was more of a transition to just like some people do that to everyone does that. So, our VPN already worked from home, and I think the adjustment for most people was just like finding a place to work comfortably. And the biggest thing has been just remembering that, as you said, like things with distractions with like having to deal with childcare when the schools have been closed, or like kids having to come home because someone in the class has got COVID or something like that, like being mindful of the other demands on people's time. And I think I can't speak for like all the teams across Monzo, but like my experience like with colleagues with children is that they've been able to take that time if they've needed to, and there's not been like any kind of expectations on them for that. So for me, the biggest challenge for all of us has been just like the mental health of it all, and the kind of the shift in the working environment rather than the actual ways of working in the technology.
Yeah, I bet. So Volker, I guess in that point, when you think about from a leadership perspective, how are you all at Monzo as leaders thinking about supporting your colleagues and the tools and the flexibility that you're offering to make sure that the mental stability of all of us and all our peers is good and taken care of, and we have the time that we need to just get over this, or get through this rather, not even get over it?
That's a great question. A lot of it does centers around what Sophie and Julian already said about like kind of just being more aware of everyone's home and like all the situations outside of work, and being flexible around those. That's definitely very, very important. I think we've talked about it a lot more, and obviously some people are comfortable more than others, but I think it's brought us closer as a team as well. We all know what's happening in each other's spaces somewhat. But as a leader, encouraging people to take time off is a hard problem, because I think a lot of people tend to want to maybe save their holidays for when we can travel again or do something fun. But it's really important to break the monotony and take some time off as well, and like not burn ourselves out looking at our screens all day every day. Like Sophie said, we already had this like infrastructure and ways of working before the pandemic as a company, but I think not everyone had a good maybe working environment. Maybe not everyone still does, and those vary a lot. But kind of encouraging people to get the equipment they need, the space, whatever's needed.
So I was going to say, is the current Monzo working style a hybrid model where you all can work if you want to work from your office, or work from home if you want? Do you think that's a good model that you'd all want to see continued, or do you think that things that need to be tweaked about it? And I ask because, you can be working from home, but you never stop because your commute time, now you have a meeting, and the lunchtime, well, my kitchen is only an arm length away, so I can just reach that. So there's a blend of your work life and your home life for those of us who live in flats and whatnot in London. But is that a working model that Voco Monzo is celebrating, and you're like encouraging it with tweaks, as you say, with people taking leave and all that sort of stuff?
Yes, I think we've always had kind of a hybrid model where people are encouraged to work from home a day when they need to, they have something going on in their lives. That's definitely worked for us. I think it depends a little bit on team by team. Within design, we've always had this kind of mostly working from the office style, where we do creative work together around the table or around the whiteboard, and we like have come together 1 or 2 days a week, at least before the pandemic, and would like to continue that, but it doesn't mean that we need to be here every day or in the office every day. I think where it gets difficult is when some people are in the office, some people are remote. I think it's pretty easy when everyone is remote and there are no hallway conversations that can be missed. But when most people are at the office, that's when it gets tough to be remote, I think. So I think in the past, this is by no means, this doesn't represent Monzo's stance, but I know we've in the past talked about maybe having fully remote teams and in office-based teams, which could help that kind of few people feeling left out.
Yeah, that's fair. Sophie and Jillian, what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I'd not heard that, actually. I think that's quite interesting. I've definitely been on a team before that was kind of 2 of us were in the office and 1 was remote, and it was really hard for her to kind of feel like she was being included in everything. And I've kind of heard before suggestions that, if some people on the team are remote, then you should all dial into the meeting rather than having some people in a meeting room and like a couple on the call. So, I might start trying that once I start going back to the office. Like myself, I love being in the office. I'm a people person, and I've really struggled this year not being around people. And I did have a beast of a commute, but I even found myself like I have more energy in the evenings now, but at the same time, like it's not worth it for the trade-off of like not seeing people, not going into town, not having to make my own lunch. Like I'm so sick of making my own lunch. I just I think definitely when this is all over, it's going to be very different. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are saying, I'm never going back in. There are going to be people being like, I can't wait to go back in. There's going to be people who do some days in, some days out. I think the important thing is that we make sure that we're accommodating everyone.
Yeah, and the balance.
Yeah,
absolutely. Jillian?
Yeah, I think the hybrid model is kind of a nice way to make things work for everybody, because I think everybody has different preferences in terms of, some people have absolutely loved this work from home and might have like a really nice home office setup, and some people are really missing it. And I think probably for myself, I'd probably like to be in the office kind of like 3 or 4 days a week, but maybe have some time at home as well. So making that kind of work best for everyone. And I think, if anything, this has definitely given us an understanding of what it's like to work remotely. So if there are those people that are still kind of wanting to work remotely more often after this, that I think everybody will be able to have a lot more kind of understanding for what they might be going through and be able to make it a more inclusive environment. But I think there's definitely those challenges in terms of like, if you're having a whiteboarding session or trying to do something interactive, that can be difficult if you're not all together kind of physically.
The interesting thing about this remote working thing that all of us have been going through is realizing how awful your Wi-Fi is at home. Because before, you never think about it. You're like, oh, I'm just going to watch Netflix, and if it's bad, there'll be a churn or whatever. But when you actually have to do work, or you're on a Zoom call for developing a product, or you're interviewing someone, it's unbelievable. When I started, when I was in London testing my Wi-Fi, it was so bad. And I literally used to write these snarky emails to Sky to say, why is my Wi-Fi so bad? And at one point, the guy said, you've had this Wi-Fi speed for nearly 3 years. Why is it bothering you now? And you don't realize all of these incidental things in your life that then make a big impact. So that's talk about choose to challenge. So one of the questions that came through prior to, thank you for reminding me. One of the questions that came through prior to our webinar, which came through offline, was talking about some of the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic, and how do we manage that. So for all 3 of you, I mean, unfortunately, the pandemic, it's not over, but what are the lessons that so far from a work and a life perspective, you sort of thought, oh, this is interesting, I'm going to readjust, or I'm going to tweak this or change this about my work-life balance? And what are some of the lessons you've been learning as we've been going through this really horrific time in our lives over 2020 and into 2021? So Julian, do you want to start?
Sure. So I think maybe more kind of on the personal side, but I always used to be a big planner of kind of like, I'm going to do this holiday at the end of the year, or I'm going to kind of see this person then and have plans months in advance, which obviously is just not possible at the moment. So I think that was kind of the biggest adjustment for me, is realizing that I have to be more kind of like flexible and adaptive and just take what's coming. And I think I've definitely become a lot more comfortable with that in the last over the last year and a bit. So that's been really nice for me. And in terms of work-life balance, I think that's really tough, because you're kind of often working in the same environment that you're just about to kind of relax in half an hour later. So it's been more about realizing that things are never finished. Like there's always more kind of on your to-do list, and you can't kind of think, I'll just finish this and then that'll be the end of the day. You have to find a stopping point and be more comfortable with that. And personally, I've just been trying to kind of like take a walk as many days as I can. There's some days where I still don't leave the house, but I've been trying a tip of putting on shoes in the morning at least, so that as soon as I
dressing for work
feel like I can take a walk, I'm already prepared. So that's been really helping my kind of mental health and feeling calm.
That's a good idea. That's a great idea. Sophie?
Yeah, I think this year has definitely given me an appreciation for like all the stuff I did. Like my hobbies kind of involve being out of the house. Like I still do. I run a choir. I'm a big music person,
fantastic.
And well, I'm not the only person who runs it, but we haven't been able to meet since last March, and it's like this massive void in my life that, you know, every Monday I used to go to King's Cross. Like I think it's given me a massive appreciation for all of that stuff, but also just generally trying not, this is definitely easier said than done, and I'm not great at this, but trying to be less hard on myself as well. Like I put a lot of pressure on myself, I always have, like trying to forgive myself for not functioning at 100% all the time, because the world is on fire, and I'm not always successful. I get very frustrated, but like ultimately a lot of the time I just have to do enough to get by, whether that's like going for a walk or not, if I can't bring myself to do it, and you know, making a nice healthy lunch, or giving up and ordering from Nando's. You know, it's okay as long as I can just, you know, eat. So sometimes it's just it's not always going to be easy to keep on the way I was before, basically.
That's fair. Also, peri chips are very hard to not say okay to, so I'm with you on that one. Yeah, absolutely. Volker, what about you?
I noticed when the pandemic started and we all had to start working from home, and a lot of things suddenly felt like out of my control, out of all of our control, which is kind of reacting to the circumstances. So for me, it became really important to find, so all of my pre-pandemic hobbies and things are pretty much undoable right now, but except reading, still great. But I found long distance running, and it's been something that's within my control, and I can set I can continue improving myself and set these goals that are within like my own control, and I move at my own pace, and I feel like I'm improving. So that's been really important for my mental health, for sure. And then just taking breaks and stretching, and I think it comes with being almost 40 and running long distances. I need to do that, but taking breaks. And
it's almost like you have to kind of not force yourself to take a break, but schedule them, because you know you have to take them, otherwise they just miss you by. One of the things that we always talk about, I mean, certainly we can't let International Women's Day and Choose to Challenge go without talking about inclusion and diversity, and talking about women's issues and how we run organizations. And Monzo has had this phenomenal run for as many years as it has. I was a Monzo customer when it was Mondo. That's how great and a fan I have been of your organization. So I guess one of the questions to ask, Volker, if we could start with you, is just thinking about how does Monzo think about I&D, and as you are part of the leadership team, what are the things that Monzo does to bring inclusion and diversity into your leadership team, and hire a diverse background, and including, you know, senior leaders who are women?
Yep, for sure. So we actually have like this kind of semi-permanent D&I in product working group that we put in place to make sure we're constantly challenging ourselves and improving and making sure we're doing everything we can. One of those three, it has three streams. One of them is hiring, and it's definitely a very, very important one. I can mainly speak for design. I kind of touch on the rest of tech as well, but in design, yeah, we put a lot of care into kind of getting a kind of a diverse pipeline together. And then one thing that I really like about our process is we look at portfolios first and foremost, not the person, not their maybe like profile, not their CV. It's about the work, and it should speak for itself. Basically, it's easy to say in design since we have such a tangible artifact, but that's important. But I'll be honest, like we do have problems with the pipeline. Definitely most people who apply for our design roles are white men, so we put aside time every week to reach out proactively to people who could add diversity to our team, and people from different backgrounds and with different strengths. So that's a reality, I guess, of our maybe our employer image as well. I think it pains me. I would love it to change, and for people who are not white men to apply more actively and to kind of, but that's our problem, and we're working to fix it. And then recently, things that we've done, we used to only have a take-home test for product designers. That was the only way to get in, is to do a take-home test, and we realized that's not inclusive for people who might, for example, have caring response, and we try to cater for individual needs, for sure. So
I mean, one of the things that Monzo does very well is at least you produce a diversity and impact report every year. And quite a few of our peers, they don't. And that's the first step to acknowledge that there is an issue, which is, here's what the issue is for all the world to see. And we're working on these metrics. I mean, Sophie, in engineering, how are you all thinking about it?
I mean, we're not perfect by any means. I think it would be a lie if I said, oh yeah, we've got this down. Like, we're working on it, but it's really hard. Like, you know, hiring in the pipeline is only part of it. You know, you can get all the diversity you want, but if there's no inclusion, then you know, people apply for the jobs, they'll get the jobs, and then they'll leave because it's crap. Like, we want to foster a really nice, a really welcoming, inclusive environment for everyone. We've actually I believe we just hired a new D&I lead actually as well. So I'm really excited to meet her and see what her plans are as well. We've got kind of a few things in flight. I saw there was another question about this, so I don't know if I don't want to spoil, no spoilers, but like, we've got a sponsorship program in engineering, as well as we've got kind of community groups on Slack. I'm trying to organize like socials for like basically I guess underrepresented genders in engineering, not just women. And trying to make sure that we kind of, as much as, you know, we celebrate things like Christmas and Easter, we'll celebrate other holidays as well, make sure people know about the cultural context behind various different holidays and like celebrations, and hear from lots of different people and different cultures.
Sophie, can you talk a little bit more actually about that sponsorship in the engineering teams?
Yeah, so it was a trial that we kicked off last year, started by our former head of D&I, Cherie, and we're going to look at bringing it back soon as well. It was started as kind of a sponsorship pilot, where like engineers, kind of mid-level to lower engineers, get paired with senior or kind of staff level engineers or managers. So I got paired with the VP of engineering, which I was terrified about, but actually it's been great. Just being given opportunities that I wouldn't otherwise be able to get. And we are looking at expanding that into kind of a mentorship and sponsoring program. So like now I'm looking at becoming one of the mentors rather than taking part in it, and expanding it across kind of product into different roles as well, not just engineering. But yeah, I mean, I can't stress the value of those things enough. Like, sponsorship is great for, you know, getting a foot in the door, becoming a voice in a room that you wouldn't be able to get to. Mentorship's been really valuable for me to get advice and like words of wisdom from someone who's seen it all and been there already. So I feel like those two kind of things have really helped me in my career.
That's fair. That's a great point. Julian, what about you all in data science?
Yeah, so I think we're hiring a lot kind of in data science at the moment. So I think that's really top of mind in terms of kind of having a balanced pipeline, and very similar to what Voco already mentioned in terms of like proactively reaching out to people to make that possible. And I think also thinking about all the ways in which people can be different. So one of the things we kind of look at in the data science interviews is that some people are kind of like on the spot thinkers and they'll give their best answer straight away, and others need some quiet time to kind of think about something, and then they'll come back with a really well prepared answer. So in our kind of more problem solving interview, we actually give people the problem and then drop off the call, which because they're all happening remotely now, to give them some thinking time, and then kind of come back and hear their answers. So just thinking about kind of like all those ways in which people can be different, and carrying that through also into team meetings to make sure that kind of if we're talking about something more technical, everybody's aware and has had time to prepare, and it kind of works for all different styles. And I think that will be a continuous process in terms of learning what are the small things that we can do to make everybody feel comfortable and ultimately grow a really kind of diverse team, because the outcomes are so much better when we can do that.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things, and I don't know enough about Monzo to say definitively, but it would be lovely to understand from the three of you, within your teams, do you have internal KPI metrics when it comes to I&D, and you're thinking, well, we need this percentage of interviewers or interviewees to be from sort of these type of I&D background, et cetera, et cetera. And so do you internally, and team by team, do you all internally have metrics that you have to hit every year, or is your I&D metrics linked to your performance or linked to any sort of compensatory plans, or how do you look at it? Some teams are different, obviously, and some companies are different, but there are some companies, for example, who will link I&D within a certain team to their compensation of that leader. And so I'm curious as to within Monzo and within your teams, do you all have any metrics that you'll have to hit year on year or month on month when it comes to I&D that shows that you're doing and obviously making inroads into that focus? Julian, happy to start with you, and then we can go to Voco and Sophie.
Yeah, so I think in terms of like wider metrics and things, that's not something that I know kind of too much about, so I'm unsure of that. I definitely know that like as a company has kind of overarching goals in terms of like increasing the representation of women in leadership and things like that. And I know that for hiring, at least like in kind of data in my team, we're really trying to make that as balanced as possible. So really like a very balanced team. So I know that I don't know kind of what the structure is around that, but I know that we have probably goals and things to track that all over.
Okay. Voco?
Yeah, we like Julian said, we have some company-wide OKRs around this right now, like they're for this year, kind of new and fresh. And then in tech we have some, and then each discipline as well has their own, so they somewhat overlap. I haven't heard of any link to compensation, like I don't think we're mature to that level yet, but I'll ask about it. I think it's an interesting concept.
So it's basically linked to the manager's compensation or the team lead. So if you have an engineering organization, then, and say the head of your engineering organization is a VP of engineering, say the CTO, then the VP of engineering's compensation is linked to metrics on certain things, I&D or environment or climate change or emissions or whatever it might be. And so he or she then actively, weirdly, I mean, money is an incentive, right? So weirdly, and then they kind of have to then manage that hiring thing. And so the HR partner and the recruiting partner becomes, they become really tight because that person's compensation or metric is linked to the talent team and the remainder of the team. So it's interesting how it spurs it on. And I'm not saying it works for everybody, but there are interesting case studies and models and companies where it has worked, and it's really flipped the metrics and the statistics for that organization. At the moment, I mean, Sophie, how big is the engineering team, and what's sort of the makeup of the engineering team, men to women? Sorry, that's a very tough question. I didn't expect you to have all the stats in your head, but
yeah, I don't have the numbers. I think we might be about, oh my goodness, like 120 engineers. I might have made that up. It is majority men. The percentage of non-men is relatively small. But we've got so I think there's 2 or 3 of us at senior level. No, yeah, there's at least that I know of, that I can think of off the top of my head. There's 2 or 3 of women and 1 non-binary person at senior level, and then we've got 2 staff engineers who are women, out of not that many, but still majority men. And we've got 4 VP engineering, 1 is a woman.
Interesting. Okay.
So, it's getting better than it was, but it is not perfect. We still got a way to go. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, great. So just to answer Natasha, who put a chat point about Apple, I used to work at Apple, so I've cheated and said a company, but yeah, it's Apple, because I used to work there, so I know that they used to do that. So we have about 15 minutes left. I have a handful of really specific questions that I've been given, but if anybody on the call would like to ask questions and put them in the chat, please feel free to do that, because we have a good 15 minutes left. And while you're typing, I'm going to ask Jillian a question that was put in our pre-questions from someone called Holly, who, Jillian, they were very specific. They said, what does the data science tech stack look like at Monzo?
So we're using a lot of Google Cloud. So we kind of have all of our data there and access it through BigQuery. And Monzo also has a kind of events-based architecture. So every time something happens in someone's app or with the payment, there's an event that's fired that kind of helps us keep track of all that data. So that means that we have kind of loads of data accessible, and we use something called DBT, or data build tool, to kind of keep track of all the dependencies between our data and build it into a state that makes it really easy to work with. And we're also using kind of Airflow to make sure that we have data running nightly or every hour or whatever it may be that we use. And then within kind of doing analysis, we use Google Colab notebooks for kind of writing Python code, which are really similar to a Jupyter notebook. And then we also make a lot of use of a tool called Looker, which is for kind of dashboarding and business intelligence things. And the reason we do that is to support a lot of self-serve culture. So a lot of people at Monzo can kind of make small tweaks to graphs and data things that are in Looker, and change time periods or use different filters or splits and things. And so that's been a really powerful tool for kind of preventing a lot of ad hoc things that would normally come to the data team, because people are empowered to do that themselves. So in the past, I've kind of often been asked to change a color in a graph or extend it for further back in time, and that kind of doesn't happen at Monzo, because our stakeholders can do that themselves, which leaves a lot more time for us to kind of do a deeper analysis.
Fantastic. Jillian, I'm such a Luddite, and you said a few words there. It's I have no idea what this means, but it sounded very authoritative and very confident. So well done. Okay, while some other people are typing, there was another fantastic question that we were given about artificial intelligence, actually. And it's a bit off-piste, but it's a new challenging way of how we think about the world in the future. I'm always scared when I look at all those Boston robotic robots. They always freak me out. But just on artificial intelligence, to the 3 of you, there was a really good question, which was, in what way do you think AI will change the fintech industry in the coming year? And how does Monzo use AI in their teams? And so if any of you have used it, maybe not Jillian, but Sophie and Boko, thoughts, AI in the fintech industry, and if it's going to be changing?
So I don't know of any cases, I might be mistaken, but I don't know of any cases where we actually use anything labeled AI. I mean, we use a lot of machine learning and data for sure. But I mean, I guess the kind of things that are considered AI, things like GPT-3 and things like that, I don't know what the plans are with that kind of thing, but I think we'd have to exercise extreme caution, because I mean, I'm naturally quite distrusting of those kind of things, like they tend to be trained on very biased data sets. I mean, so I think there's a lot of potential for, you know, alienating people, accidentally building non-inclusive products if we rely on these tools. So I think there'd have to be a pretty good case for using I mean, I'm not the kind of person who makes those decisions, obviously, but I mean, from my perspective, I think we'd have to have a good case for using it and have it proven that we can do it in a way that is still inclusive and ethical as well.
That's a great point. Wilco, what do you think?
I'm by no means an expert. I'm not sure I have anything to add, except I completely agree with Sophie's point about like AI and like everything I know about machine learning, and that world it's still like a lot of human input and then affects the output. So like I would want us to be very careful with that. But yeah, it's not something I'm know much about, to be honest.
Yeah, that's fair. I think, Sophie, your point about the ethical part of it, it's just such an unexplored sort of world that we have to go into, and I don't think we fully thought through the ethical sort of efficacy of doing it. And it sounds all great and all, but what's going to happen in 20 years? I don't think we have really thought that through. So that's a really good point to make. There's a question in our chat, which was about how does one look at the question is really about, you're a software engineer and you're looking for a new role. So what are some of the tips that you might have about how one should market themselves and how people should stand out so that they can be chosen to look at roles and be hired? So Sophie, given this is sort of your bailiwick, thoughts on from an engineering perspective about how you would market, or how would you beef up your LinkedIn to be noticed and apply for roles?
Interesting. Yeah, I've reviewed a lot of CVs and applications, and I think that, so from the perspective of like applications, they don't all ask for a cover letter, but if they do, don't make it obvious that you've copied and pasted it, and like show, I guess I'm kind of torn on the whole kind of show why you want to work for this company, because often the answer is because I need a job and I want some money, and that is a legitimate reason to apply for a job. But you know, I think on your CV, make sure for one thing it's not longer than 2 pages. Make sure it's don't try and be, I mean, don't try and stand out too much. Like just a normal CV is fine. Like I've seen some weird CVs. A normal CV, bullet points of like, you know, your experience and what you've done in the past. If you've got, like when I'm reviewing CVs, if there's work experience, I don't bother even looking at the education and stuff, because yeah, it's kind of irrelevant. But you know, top level summary of like, I have like one sentence of like, you know, passionate web engineer, like about, for example, I'm passionate about web accessibility, so I mentioned that, and get someone else to look it over and tell you where you're selling yourself short, because you almost inevitably will be. So play up your achievements, even if it feels wrong. And regarding the person in question said, like, in my experience, applying on a company's website doesn't really seem to go anywhere. If they don't reply to your application, that's not somewhere you want to work. Like a company should have the guts to actually reply to you, even if it's just a no. Like when I was applying for Monzo, I applied to a few different places and a couple of places didn't reply to me, and I was just like, well, you know, I've spent time actually filling out the application on your website, and honestly I just feel like you don't, I don't matter to you. But also, you can, if it is somewhere you really want to work and you haven't heard back, you can follow up with an email. And that's especially true of like of when if you do get an interview or a call back and you haven't heard anything, you can follow up. Often things will either have just slipped under the radar or there'll be some kind of hold up. But it is okay to email the recruiters and say, hey, I haven't heard anything. It shows, if anything, it shows you're interested. So
I so agree with that. And I think the point you made, Sophie, about if they haven't replied, it's a really good tell that that's not where you want to work, because actually people, particularly in our industry in fintech, I mean, I'm super biased, but we're inherently kind of nice people who care deeply about that whole experience of the candidate, and it's so competitive. So, you're falling over yourself almost to be the nicest of the lot to reply. So yeah, that's a super good point. Vuko, in your world, I mean, it's really about, as you were saying earlier, it's about the portfolio and about the work. So what are you looking for when you're hiring designers, or when you're building your design team? What are you looking for from candidates?
Yep, it work first and foremost, but also like we are building a team. I think of it kind of like the X-Men, where everyone has their own like specialty and strength and kind of way to like solve problems, and then together they're invincible. That's kind of how I see building a design team as well, is bringing in people from different backgrounds, different kind of, I think the interesting thing about a lot of designers is many people have studied design, but a lot of people maybe have a different background as well. Like, for example, I studied economics first and then design. We've had a lot ex-lawyer on the team. I think it's really interesting for people to come in with different life experience, different points of view. Monzo's mission is to make money work for everyone, and we definitely think that the team should reflect our customer base, and that's not true yet, but we're working towards it. But also as a design team, to have different strengths, different like, for example, someone could be really good at prototyping and someone else really good at like some sort of research that none of us know how to do, and then together we can like learn from each other and develop as a team. So that's what matters to me a lot. So if I see someone who would bring in a new type of thinking or a skill that we don't have, that's really exciting, because we don't want 5 of the same person.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, completely. We have a few minutes left. And so one of the things I was going to just ask our panel, firstly, say thank you very much, because you all have been superb and wonderful and really great. Just to end with a handful of thoughts on what are you excited about for this year, and what's making you optimistic and enjoyed life, work, but also with Monzo, and what are you all thinking about for the new year, and the optimism that you're going to. So just a handful of thoughts about that as we wrap up for the last 4 or 5 minutes. Jillian, do you want to go?
Sure. So I'm really excited about kind of Monzo growing, particularly the data team. I think there just means there's so much more that we can do, and I'm really excited to see what the team is going to look like towards the end of the year. And personally, just for things to kind of get back more to normal, whatever that means.
The vaccine, basically the vaccine.
To see friends and family, and just for that to kind of be easy again. I'm really looking forward to that.
Cool. Sophie?
Yeah, I mean, the vaccine's the obvious one. As soon as it's possible, I'm just going to hug everyone I can. But I think I'm excited for hopefully growing our web capacity at Monzo as well. We're a very small team at the moment. And I don't know, I think we're building web banking for business customers at the moment, and it's been great. And I'm just really looking forward to seeing where that can go, basically.
Fantastic. Vuko?
I'm excited for the vaccine. I haven't seen my family in a year and a half, friends all over the world. I'm really looking forward to spring and more light. Honestly, it's been a hard winter. And then work-wise, we're growing the team across disciplines, but in design as well. And it's just been really exciting to meet new people and have them join, and to get all these new perspectives and energies on the team. And then we're also working on some new exciting product features that I think will help people, and also really looking forward to get those out and see the reaction.
That sounds great. That sounds really fantastic. I should say, I mean, I'm also really all proud of all of us. Like, I think this was really hard over the last couple of years. So, all of us have suffered through and come out the right way, and everybody's all optimistic still. So I'm really proud of all of us that we've hung in there, and we do things like this because the last thing one wants to do is get on another Zoom call, which has nothing to do with the work. So thank you to all of you for really hanging in there and listening to us speak for an hour. I just want to say a quick few things about Ada's List. You can find us on at Ada's List. That's our Twitter handle. You can also join as a member. So if we have a Patreon, so if you want to join Ada's List as a member, there's also a job site at Ada's List. So So if you want to find a new job or you want to post jobs, then you have about 8,000 women who are already on this platform who you can post jobs to. So as you're looking at your diversity and inclusion metrics, then that's where you can go to for that. And we have a conference every year, so you can attend the ADIS conference at the end of the year. At some point, we're going to ask for speakers. So we'd love for you to pitch what you'd like to speak about to all of our members, and certainly anybody who wants to join. But it's been really delightful. Thank you so much for your time and for engaging. I think this is lunchtime now in London or wherever you are. I'm in Melbourne and it's 1 o'clock in the morning, so that's why I'm speaking very well. But thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have had a great session. And of course, feel free to email us after, as and when you'd like to talk about anything and all things women in tech. But it's been great. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.